Incredible single father donated 50% of his salary to orphans until a wealthy benefactor changed everything. Jack's hands were oily, thick with a day's worth of work at his auto repair shop, muscles taut from hours spent under hoods and cars. Each creak of the door echoed in the small Midwest town. It reminded him of the emptiness at home. He hid his grief behind the cheerful banter with customers, all while trying to shield his 7-year-old son Ben from the shadows of their loss. Jack never wanted Ben to grow up feeling abandoned, so he stitched the remnants of his family values into the fabric of their daily lives. Half of his modest income, a sacrifice that gnawed at his finances, poured into the local orphanage, a tribute to the love he and his late wife had shared. Yet every smile he faked felt like a betrayal. Jack hovered between the pressure of making ends meet and the pride of donating to a place that mirrored his values. Some days, the bills piled up like wrecked cars outside his shop, creating a clockwork of anxiety ticking in the back of his mind. He couldn't give up on the orphans, not now. Deep inside, he believed that love transcended blood, that family could be born out of kindness and community support. But every month, that decision turned heavier, the weight of his charity threatening to crush his bones. Just then, Mrs. Hargrove breezed into town, despite the whispers she left behind. A wealthy benefactor, she promised a financial renaissance for the orphanage. There was hope, glistening like freshly polished chrome, but the strings attached coiled around Jack's heart. Her notion of transforming love into commercial ventures sent a wave of unease rippling through him. Could he accept her lifeline that came at the cost of moral values? His community looked up to him, but the tide was turning. What would they think when they saw him negotiating the soul of something he held dear? "I can't compromise," he muttered to himself, hands trembling against the metal of the wrench. The looming thought of providing for Ben tightens his chest. The weight of doubt churned his stomach. If he declined Mrs. Hargrove's offer, would he ultimately be betraying his son? They'd be drowning in unpaid bills, while the orphans could thrive. "I can figure it out," he assured himself, but self-deception layered like paint over fears that gnawed at him. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. The next few days were a blur of heated conversations and tense meetings with townspeople. They watched him, waiting to see if he'd cave while the dilemma pressed hard against his ribs. Just when he thought he might find a compromise, he discovered a chilling reality about Mrs. Hargrove's intentions, a darkness veiled behind her promises of grandeur. The exploitation simmered below the surface, taunting him. Whispers floated in the air, igniting his anxiety. As Jack stood in the garage one late afternoon, wrestling with swirling thoughts and tightening muscles, the realization struck him like a wrench to the gut. The sanctity he'd clung to, the way of life he'd fought to maintain, was on the brink of shattering. Would he betray his family's legacy for security? Balancing on the precipice of an impossible choice, fear wrestled with resolve, and he couldn't tell which way was up. The future hung heavy with uncertainty, as the very values he cherished threatened to slip through his fingers, leaving him gasping in a storm he may not survive. Jack's mind raced, trapped between the grinding realities of his life and the seductive promise of financial stability. The day's sunlight streamed through the garage windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the grim thoughts swirling in his head. He wiped his hands on a greasy rag, the fabric only partially absorbing the frustration that bubbled beneath his skin. Every conversation with Mrs. Hargrove echoed, her confident voice weaving through his thoughts like a persistent melody he couldn't shake. "Imagine what we could achieve together," she had said, her eyes glinting with ambition. Each time he replayed it, Her tone slipped deeper into something cold, something transactional. Could this truly be the answer to the financial woes of the orphanage? But at what cost? His moral compass spun wildly as he contemplated the implications of her vision. Concealed within the frenzy of his thoughts, a small voice of determination emerged. He'd always prided himself on his clear sense of right and wrong, on being a man of his word, a father and a protector of those who couldn't defend themselves. But was that idealism a luxury he could afford right now? Jack's lips pressed into a thin line. The decision before him was about survival, both for himself and for Ben. The hum of approaching cars shook him from his reverie, the familiar sounds of the community filtering in. He stepped outside, heart pounding against his ribs, as he watched his neighbors pass. They didn't know the real battle unfolding behind the walls of his garage, a soldier caught between fierce loyalty and the darkness of desperation. Jack waved to them, forcing a smile, but it felt heavy, like a mask slipping into place over cracks. Tension settled in his shoulders as he decided on a course of action. He needed to resist the pull of Mrs. Hargrove, but that meant finding another source of income. Digging deep, he began recalibrating his business plans. What if he expanded his shop's services? He had years of experience and could offer more than just repairs. Detailing, tire sales, perhaps even used car sales could help create the profit margin he desperately needed. But could he handle the additional pressure? Doubt began to seep in as he imagined juggling the demands of expanded operations alongside raising Ben. Jack clenched his jaw, reminding himself that every challenge was merely another test of his resolve. He had to believe he could rise to this occasion, not just for himself, but for Ben's future. He spent the next few days outlining a new business strategy on scraps of paper, ideas flourishing as he dreamed of future growth. His father had taught him how to fix cars, but his mother had instilled a love of strategy within him. Taking inspiration from that heritage felt empowering. With each plan sketched into the margins, he felt a renewed sense of purpose deviate from the looming darkness. Ben entered the garage a few days later, his small face bright and curious. "Daddy, can we work on the blue rocket together?" he asked, eyes sparkling with excitement. Jack's heart soared at the reminder of why he had always fought so hard, the little boy who needed to see his father strong. "Absolutely, buddy," he replied, a grin breaking through his earlier gloom. They settled down to work on the old car, grease staining their hands as laughter melted away Jack's weighty thoughts. In that moment, he realized that every sacrifice he made built a resilience in them both. However, as they enjoyed their moment together, a chilling reminder loomed. He hadn't yet dealt with Mrs. Hargrove. Her looming presence still shadowed him, and eventually he would have to confront her once more. The clock ticked down, and Jack sensed their inevitable confrontation breathing over his shoulder, as close as an uninvited guest. Prepared to take control of his life, he steeled his resolve. The moment of truth was approaching, and a path lay ahead. Would he stand firm against her, or would he succumb to the very thing he feared? Only time would tell, and Jack knew he had to prepare for the storm to come. As the days unraveled into a blur of grease and action, Jack found himself submerged in the frenzied pace of his new plans. The garage transformed into a haven of creativity, bursting with sketches of potential ventures. Each day, fragments of his ambition grew more defined. The possibility of adding detailing and used car sales glimmered on the horizon like a beacon calling him forward. Yet, underlying the excitement lay a gnawing anxiety. Every time Jack considered reaching out to Mrs. Hargrove, a wave of uncertainty crashed over him. She had the power to infuse his plans with capital, but at the expense of his autonomy. Could he outsmart the very system he was trying so hard to rebuild? He wrestled with his conscience, replaying their previous interactions. Conversations like a broken record. Her persuasive language had unnerved him, blurring the line between opportunity and obligation. One afternoon, motivation sparked challenging yet pivotal thoughts. Jack decided to conduct market research. He needed to understand the nuances of the local automotive industry better. He pored over online forums and spoke to fellow mechanics, unearthing insights that felt like gold. Each conversation rekindled a fire in him. He realized he had amassed a wealth of knowledge over the years, but had largely kept it dormant. Now, that wellspring of expertise became his foundation, propelling him towards empowerment. With renewed vigor, Jack crafted a detailed business proposal that illustrated potential profitability from his expansion plans. Cold sweat trickled down his brow as he printed the final version on pristine white paper. The anticipation of presenting it to Mrs. Hargrove was electrifying. What if, he thought, he could negotiate terms that respected his vision rather than compromising his values? Could he steer the conversation rather than allow it to control him? One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Ben crashed on the couch while Jack slouched in a chair, reviewing his notes. Glancing at his son, vulnerabilities nestled deeper into Jack's heart, converging into a singular focus. He was not just doing this for himself. He was doing it for Ben, for the security and future they both envisioned together. Each decision would ripple through their shared life. Slowly, determination morphed into a fierce conviction that lurked just beneath his surface, daring him to act. Then, as if voicing her presence despite the fading daylight, Mrs. Hargrove called. Her smooth voice reached through the phone like a silken thread, weaving through her resolves. "I'm eager to discuss your progress," she stated, the professional enthusiasm underpinning a statement more complex than it appeared. Jack felt the insomniac dread creep back, clinging like a wet blanket as he realized he could no longer postpone their meeting. Preparing for her impending arrival, he pushed himself even further, practicing responses and anticipations of her approach. Everything felt orchestrated, a chess game where the stakes were not merely financial but ethically vital. Finally, the day came. Jack stood in the center of the garage, surrounded by the tools of his trade, reflective of both his past and a hopeful future. He felt every heartbeat echo within the hollowness of the shop, and every creak of the walls amplified his building tension. An abrupt knock broke the stillness, echoing through the air like a warning shot. Sensing the weight of his decision coiling tightly within him, Jack approached the door with measured steps, ready to meet the embodiment of his conflict. As he opened the door, her confident figure stood framed in the doorway, an unexpected reminder of the delicate power dynamics at play. The conversation he had mentally rehearsed for days came rushing to the surface, ready to be unleashed into the waiting void. Jack inhaled sharply. The time had come to face Mrs. Hargrove. To navigate the treacherous waters of compromise, would he reclaim control of his vision, or would he allow her to dictate terms that threatened to shatter his moral core? With each second that ticked by, he felt the weight of the moment building, pushing him to make choices that would irrevocably shape his journey. The door swung wide, and the shadows cast by the garish overhead lights inside the garage whipped through Jack's mind like a scattered deck of cards. "Thank you for inviting me, Jack," Mrs. Hargrove said, her smile polished but devoid of warmth. She entered the space with an ease that betrayed no sense of the tension thrumming in Jack's core. He shut the door behind her, sealing the air of his ambition within the walls. "Of course, Mrs. Hargrove. I've been eager to discuss the proposal," he replied, voice steadier than he felt. She took a moment to survey the space, her gaze roaming over the drawings pinned to the wall, the cluttered workbench, and the worn-out chairs. Every detail felt exposed under her scrutiny, as if she were assessing not just his business, but the man himself. "Impressive work you've done here," she remarked, gesturing toward the sketches with a slight nod. "But let's get down to business, shall we?" The words rang like a bell in his thoughts, sharpening the moment. Jack took a forgiving breath, reminding himself of all the research he had conducted. This was his moment to reclaim his narrative, not just as a mechanic, but as a businessman. I believe you'll find that this proposal outlines not just the potential for growth, but also how those profits could establish a sustainable future. As he pulled out the meticulously crafted document, tension rippled in the air, a thin line drawn between them that felt both charged and fragile. He laid it on the table, his fingers brushing the paper lightly, trying to anchor himself to the solidity of his intent. Mrs. Hargrove flipped through the proposal, her brow furrowing slightly with each turn of the page. Jack's pulse quickened. Was she seeing the vision he had spent sleepless nights sketching, or was she merely looking for weaknesses in his strategy? "There are certainly intriguing points here," she acknowledged after a long moment. "However, I think we need to redefine a few parameters if we're going to make this workable." His heart sank, but he fought to keep his expression neutral. "What do you propose?" he asked, determined to extend the conversation beyond her entrenched agenda. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her demeanor shifting to one of moderation. "You might consider revisiting your figures. An investment is," she hesitated, searching for the right phrasing, "a partnership that demands some concessions. I could offer you not just funds, but my expertise in navigating the complexities of the auto industry." The implication hung heavy between them, her words dawning with an enticing gravity. Yet Jack's stomach churned. This could mean forsaking much of what he envisioned, stepping away from decisions that were core to his values. "Mrs. Hargrove, I appreciate your offer, but I want to lead this company on my terms, not merely serve as a front for someone else's vision." He didn't recognize the conviction in his own voice at first, but as it settled, he felt a sense of power wash over him. Maybe he wasn't just a mechanic dreaming of something bigger. Perhaps he was capable of creating a brand rooted in his principles. Her smile wavered for the briefest second, revealing the true nature of their discourse. "Be careful, Jack," she warned softly, leaning forward, piercing gaze meeting his. "There are risks in stubbornness. The industry is unforgiving." Jack held her gaze, determination burning bright. "And so is complacency. This isn't merely about money or leverage, it's about integrity." The silence stretched as unyielding as the concrete beneath them, both battling against their unspoken fears, her fear of relinquishing control and his of losing the fragile flame of aspiration he had nurtured. Finally, Jack broke the stillness. "If you're willing to negotiate in good faith, we can find common ground. But if not," he paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, "then I'm better off taking the risk alone." With those words, he felt a shift within himself, a sense of clarity that obliterated the noise of uncertainty. Yet he understood that the road ahead was filled with landmines disguised as opportunities. "Very well," she said, her demeanor hardened into something akin to respect. "Let's see how far your vision stretches." As they dove into specific negotiations, Jack's mind raced with the potential implications. Could he meet her demands and still maintain the integrity of his business? Would he secure a foothold in the industry while still being true to his principles? In the back of his mind loomed the ticking clock of opportunity against the steady pulse of risk. Would he navigate this delicate dance with integrity intact, or would he take a wrong turn that could haunt him forever? This was just the beginning of a confrontation where much more than business would be at stake. The thought lingered, almost palpable, pressing down on him with a weight he couldn't shake. The delicate game of power had begun. What other revelations awaited in the shadows? Jack felt his resolve harden as the negotiation deepened. With every word exchanged, he began to perceive the subtle layers of Mrs. Hargrove's intentions. She wasn't merely a financer. She was a gatekeeper to a world that could elevate his dreams or hold them hostage. The gravity of his choices settled heavily on his shoulders. "Let's discuss those projected sales figures," she said, her tone shifting to one of authority. "If you can't support those numbers, it will raise red flags for investors." He nodded, swallowing the bitterness that threatened to rise. This was his chance to stand tall against a formidable opponent. "I've conducted extensive market research," he responded, voice steady. "We've seen a notable uptick in consumer interest towards environmentally friendly vehicles. Our strategic partnerships could significantly bolster these numbers." Her expression remained inscrutable. Dark eyes narrowed as she scrutinized his confidence. "Say I'm convinced of your vision, Jack. What's your plan if the market doesn't respond? What contingencies have you considered?" Once more his stomach tightened. The questions cut deeper, forcing him to confront not only his business acumen, but also the uncertainty that gnawed at him. "I believe in adaptability. Should conditions shift, we pivot. Enhance marketing approaches, adjust inventory, diversify partnerships." "Nice theory," she replied, allowing a slight smirk. "But the reality often demands more than agility. It requires resourcefulness." Jack bristled at her challenge, not just at the critique, but at the insinuation that he lacked what it took. A deep breath steadied him. "Resourcefulness isn't just a trait, it's a mindset. Look at my workshop. There's not an inch of strategy that doesn't involve retrofitting what we have with innovation. I'm not afraid to roll up my sleeves and get it done." Mrs. Hargrove raised an eyebrow, intrigued for the first time. "That's encouraging," she admitted, "but talk is cheap. I want to see true flexibility in action." A spark of defiance ignited within him. "Then let me prove it. I can run a pilot campaign that doesn't just showcase our current offerings, but also highlights how they compare in value over traditional vehicles." "Bold," she acknowledged, her tone almost teasing. "And what happens if you fail?" Jack leaned forward, resolute. "Failure isn't an option. My family depends on this. If I can't provide a better future here, I've failed them." As he spoke, unbidden thoughts swirled through his mind. Images of his daughter, Ella, and the life he envisioned for her. That clarity cut through the haze of uncertainty, grounding him. His ambition wasn't merely abstract. It was tethered to something real, something that mattered. "Passion doesn't always translate to results," Mrs. Hargrove said, her voice taking on a softer edge. "It's good to see you care, but don't let that become a weakness. I've seen unyielding passion blind people to critical risks." He absorbed her warning, acutely aware of the line he was walking, between idealism and pragmatism. "Understand this. If I compromise my vision for the sake of numbers, I'll lose what makes this venture worthwhile. I want to build a legacy, not just a business." Now there was understanding flickering across Mrs. Hargrove's features, a subtle respect. "Then we need to align our interests. Show me your pilot proposal. If I see potential, I might just back you, as long as you accept guidance along the way." Jack felt an unexpected thrill race through him. This was the opening he had sought, the chance to weave both their futures together while remaining true to his ethos. "I'm willing to collaborate, but I won't give up my vision." "Let's see if your vision is worth cultivating," she replied, her gaze neither warm nor unyielding. Towards logistics, Jack's mind whirled. He needed to formulate a cohesive plan while still absorbing her critiques. Each moment fueled his determination to carve a path not just for himself, but for Ella, a path that embodied innovation and integrity. But as the stakes rose with every agreement forged, Jack couldn't shake the sense that unseen forces were aligning, preparing to challenge him in ways he could hardly anticipate. He realized that the competition was not solely about finance. It was a clash of ideals, ambitions, and dreams. Pulling out a notepad, he began jotting down thoughts for the pitch. But the uncertainty lingered, an undercurrent pulling at the edges of his resolve. In his gut, he knew they wouldn't be the only players on the board. Outside, as shadows took over the garage, Jack prepared himself to battle not just for the business, but for the legacy that was beginning to overshadow everything he had ever strived for. The weight of ambition pressed against him, igniting deeper questions about sacrifice and loyalty. Was he ready for the hurdles ahead, or would he discover hidden doubts within himself that could unravel everything? Jack sank into the quiet of the workshop, inhaling the scent of motor oil and freshly cut wood. The eerie stillness felt foreign, a stark contrast to the vibrant ideas swirling in his mind. The conversation with Mrs. Hargrove had left him invigorated yet unsettled. He needed to harness this momentum while battling the nagging doubt that lingered like a shadow. He spread out the marketing data and trends he had compiled, papers draped over the workbench, each figure a thread in the tapestry he aimed to weave. Failure was theoretically off the table, but the reality was daunting. What was he truly capable of when the stakes weren't just numbers, but his family's future? He flicked through notes, looking for clarity, knowing time was his enemy. Deep down, Jack understood that this pilot campaign represented more than potential revenue. It was a proving ground. Align interests, he murmured to himself, echoing Mrs. Hargrove's words. Aligning interests, a deceptively simple phrase demanding complex execution. How could he align the interests of his vision with the hard realities of financial obligations? The answer lay in innovation interlaced with practicality. As night deepened, distractions loomed larger. Bills stacked in an untidy pile on the counter, a family portrait on the wall reminding him of Ella's bright eyes, suddenly burdened by expectations he never placed solely on her. His heart pounded at the thought, would she still respect him if he failed? Yet the urge to innovate surged anew. Strategy demanded not only adaptation, but creativity rooted in authenticity. Could he craft an identity around sustainability that surpassed mere sales figures? What if he made the customer a part of the story itself, a journey toward changing how they viewed not just vehicles, but their lifestyle choices? He grabbed a fresh sheet and began jotting down ideas. Connecting consumers emotionally to his brand would be essential, pushing beyond the mechanics of the product into the realm of values. A brand deep-rooted in environmental commitment could resonate in a way that numbers alone never would. Each bullet point invigorated him further, providing him with a new focus. But then a jarring question surfaced. What if Mrs. Hargrove's skepticism wasn't solely about numbers? Was there an underlying concern, perhaps even a challenge to his very ethos? She had almost invited him to confront his passion's limits. If risk management was a prerequisite, how could he embrace it without sacrificing his vision? He sighed, tightening his grip on the pencil. This was not just a professional hurdle, it felt personal. Should he continue to invest everything he had in this dream, or was it time to reel it back, to protect himself and his family? Shifting his focus from sales figures to consumer engagement felt right, but it strayed dangerously close to idealism. Was he being naive? The question swirled in his mind like a relentless tide. What happens if you fail? For now, it focused Jack's energy. He would show Mrs. Hargrove that failure wasn't in his lexicon, but neither was blind ambition. Clarity began laying pathways for how to craft the pitch, a fusion of creativity and adaptability. He would integrate data-driven insights with a storytelling approach that could ignite passion in potential customers. Just as he jotted down the last note, an ominous dread nudged his instincts. What if the guidance Mrs. Hargrove intended came at the cost of his core values? Realigning interests could become a subtle tug-of-war, where compromise would clash with conviction. Jack stood, resolved. He needed to remain anchored to his vision while navigating the turbulent waters of his partnership with Mrs. Hargrove. As he turned off the workbench light, a fragment of uncertainty crept back. What hidden agendas lay beneath her polished professionalism? The path forward was fraught with as much peril as possibility, and this would require not just his intellect, but an unwavering faith in himself. Tomorrow, Jack would draft the vision statement that would redefine their collaboration, but today had initiated a crucial introspection, one that would either fortify his resolve or unravel everything he believed in. Somewhere deep inside, he felt the wheels turning. A shift was coming, whether from within him or from the forces he could not yet see. Was he prepared to face a conflict that threatened the very foundation of his ideals? The morning sun filtered through the workshop windows, casting stripes of light and shadow that danced across Jack's cluttered workbench. distant sounds of the neighborhood waking up, but the usual cheeriness felt muted to him. He sat at his desk, staring at a blank page, grappling with the enormity of what lay ahead. Drafting a vision statement seemed deceptively simple, yet it felt like a delicate balancing act between aspiration and reality. He picked up his pencil, but instead of jotting down the bold ideas that had a light of his mind only the night before, he hesitated. What if his dreams outpaced his capabilities? He could almost hear Mrs. Hargrove's voice urging him to anchor his ambitions in the foundational principles of risk management. Words of encouragement or a veiled challenge? He needed to decide. As he began to write, the words flowed, then faltered, scattered like leaves caught in an autumn wind. A commitment to sustainability. No, that felt overly idealistic. Innovative consumer engagement, but that lacked the authenticity he craved. Each stabbed word left him more entangled in uncertainty. He felt as if he were searching for a thread to pull, knowing it could unravel not only his ideas, but the very fabric of his self-worth. In that moment of introspection, he noticed the family portrait hanging crookedly on the wall, a simple yet powerful reminder of his motivation. Ella's smile flickered through his mind, igniting determination within him. He wasn't just creating a business, he was building a legacy. This vision had to reflect not just numbers, but also the values he wanted his daughter to admire. Fueled by new resolve, he turned the paper over, clearing the clutter swirling in his mind. He reminded himself that practicality didn't have to extinguish passion, that a framework could foster innovative growth. He sketched a rough outline, focusing first on a primal promise: empowering families towards sustainable choices. The phrase resonated within him, and his heartbeat synced with the rhythm of newfound clarity. Jack felt invigorated. The idea had morphed into something he could truly believe in. Yet an intrusion emerged. Bridging his objectives with a strategy to manage risks weighed heavily. Would that commitment to sustainability put him at odds with market realities? He envisioned potential pitfalls, rejected partnerships, underwhelming sales forecasts. The anxiety scratched at his focus, but he pushed past it. He engaged in self-critique, asking himself where potential compromises lay. Financial prudence was essential, yet what if adherence to values took a back seat in this calculated dance? Would he still recognize himself if he had to shift the vision to meet dispassionate demands? The shadows of doubt whispered sinister thoughts that twisted his resolve, trying to convince him that practicality was inherently opposed to passion. A knock interrupted his spiral of self-doubt. It was Ella, her eyes wide with curiosity as she peeked into the workshop. "Daddy, can I help you?" she asked, her innocence cutting through his tumult. "Of course, help me brainstorm," he said, a smile breaking through. In her presence, the weight of expectation lifted slightly. She reminded him of the joy in creation, the essence of innovation, rooted in fun and discovery rather than mere profit. As they sketched together, crayons on thick paper, Jack experienced a revelation. Involving consumers in creating a narrative wasn't merely about marketing. It was a broader invitation to join a movement. The hour slips by unnoticed. When Ella's bright ha-ha nestled into the atmosphere, he saw a clearer path forward. Generating a brand narrative that spoke to the heart, a way to transform consumer choices into shared stories, could ignite something beyond sales figures. But as the playful exchanges faded into contemplative silence, Jack grimaced at the complexities ahead. Balancing idealism with market pragmatism was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring the critical conversation with Mrs. Hargrove, and in her responses, he anticipated both insight and challenge. What if this step shattered the transformational vision he had begun to crystallize? Would he stand ready to defend or even reshape his core beliefs in the face of her seasoned skepticism? Today's brainstorming session felt like just a momentary flicker of passion, hinting that the real test was to come. Jack's heart raced with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The moment of confrontation approached, a necessary reckoning of where creativity and reality would meet. Would he emerge emboldened, or would the pressure to conform compel him to alter the very essence of his purpose? Today's brainstorming session felt like just a momentary flicker of passion, hinting that the real test was to come. Jack's heart raced with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The moment of confrontation approached, a necessary reckoning of where creativity and reality would meet. Would he emerge emboldened, or would the pressure to conform compel him to alter the very essence of his purpose? Jack's mind swirled with the potential consequences of his upcoming meeting with Mrs. Hargrove. The specter of doubt loomed large, but as he prepared for bed that night, her steadfast principles resonated deeply within him. Negotiation is not about surrendering your values, she had often said. It's about finding a balance between your convictions and the realities of the marketplace. As he lay in the darkness, he replayed her words, searching for courage amid his anxiety. He had demonstrated resilience in his various ventures before, yet the stakes felt monumental this time. It was no longer solely about business. It was about his legacy and the impression he would leave on Ella. Morning light spilled through the window, pulling Jack from an uneasy sleep. With a deep breath, he fortified himself with the mantra he'd crafted: empowering families toward sustainable choices. It was more than just a slogan. It encapsulated his mission and vision for the future he wanted to own. The thought alone injected him with a surge of resolve. In the workshop, he aligned the clutter on his workbench, shifting items into a semblance of order, a physical reflection of the mental focus he strived to achieve. He made notes on potential risks and strategies, organizing his ideas as if they were gears of an intricate machine. Each concern written down transformed a shadowy fear into an actionable item, allowing him to visualize solutions. But the temptation to overprepare hovered ominously. What if analyzing risk became a debilitating crutch, preventing him from truly engaging during the meeting? The mere possibility of freezing under Mrs. Hargrove's critical gaze sent ripples of anxiety through him. He needed to trust his instincts, put faith in the vision he was beginning to mold. As he stepped into the meeting room that afternoon, Jack's pulse quickened. The walls, lined with articles about past successes in sustainable business, added to the pressure. There she was, Mrs. Hargrove, seated with her trademark stern expression. Her authority palpable. The moment felt surreal, like standing at the edge of a cliff, gazing down into uncharted waters below. "Jack, let's get to it," she said, her analytical gaze unwavering. "You have ideas. Now, tell me, what's your strategy?" Drawing on the brief moments of clarity he'd felt recently, Jack launched into his vision statement. "I envision a brand that empowers families to choose sustainable options while making informed, impactful choices." The words poured forth, catalyzed by the passion he discovered with Ella's vibrant presence. He felt a measured acknowledgement in Mrs. Hargrove's expression. But then she leaned forward, focusing intently. "And how do you reconcile that with costs? Is this vision grounded in reality, or is it simply idealism?" The question hung heavily, a steel thread slicing through his fervor. "It's grounded in a dual evaluation of our market and moral imperatives," he countered, recalling the qualms that had ensnared him just days prior. "I'm committed to not just profitability, but to an authentic narrative that connects our consumers in a meaningful way." Mrs. Hargrove raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued yet still probing. "You'll face obstacles. I need to know if you're prepared to adapt if the market demands compromise." Sweat trickled down his back, but he leaned into her gaze. This was the crux of the matter, not just risk management, but a test of his integrity. "I'm willing to adapt, but I won't compromise the core values that drive this vision. If I sacrifice them for mere gains, I lose sight of why I'm building this in the first place." The silence stretched thin between them, charged with tension. Jack's heart raced. Had he overstepped? Would this conviction secure her respect or seal his potential failure? "Interesting," she murmured, pensively tapping a finger on the table. "You might have something worth exploring, Jack. But understand, these values you hold dear, they'll be tested." Their conversation continued, each exchange fueling Jack's determination while unraveling new layers of complexity. He left the meeting drained, but more importantly, uncaged. He understood risks must be navigated, not dismissed, but he had stood firm on the foundational values that mattered most. As he stepped back into the sunlight, something inside him shimmered with newfound clarity. The crossroads of ambition and integrity loomed ahead, and Jack recognized that the journey was not meant to be linear. Tomorrow promised additional hurdles, but he felt ready for the unseen twists that lay ahead. Would his dedication to principal ideals serve as a guide to illuminate the path forward, or would the looming pressures of the market force him into unwanted concessions? The week following his meeting with Mrs. Hargrove transformed into a labyrinth of challenges and self-realization for Jack. Every endeavor he encountered seemed to reflect his core values back at him, forcing him to scrutinize their relevance in a competitive landscape that never slept. First came the looming decisions with suppliers. Jack had encountered an opportunity that could significantly cut costs. An overseas manufacturer with questionable ethical practices. The tempting prospect of saving money rattled his resolve. He weighed the potential benefits against the implications that choosing this path would have on his brand's integrity. It was one of the first moments since the meeting with Mrs. Hargrove where he confronted the fissure between his ideals and the harsh reality of the market. "We can't sacrifice quality and ethics for profits," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, as he paced around his workshop. The space felt stifling, filled with remnants of projects that once excited him. Jack's pulse quickened as he thought of their impact on families. With each choice, he was determining the type of legacy he would leave behind, not just for himself, but for Ella. It became increasingly clear that tensions in making these decisions were eating away at his moral foundation. Planning sessions with his team now felt like walking a tightrope. Every suggestion had the potential of veering off into moral ambiguity. One afternoon, in a bid to leverage his team's strengths, he facilitated a brainstorming session where he encouraged everyone to be candid. He laid bare his own struggles with the supplier dilemma, inviting his teammates to share their perspectives on maintaining ethical clarity amid financial pressures. To his surprise, transparency sparked a torrent of ideas flowing through the room like a fresh breeze. Ellen, one of his designers, proposed a partnership with local artisans, focusing on sustainable materials instead of replicating low-cost alternatives. The idea invigorated Jack, filling him with an undeniable vigor. As they mapped out the potential impact on the community and their brand, he realized that the right decisions often laid within ethical boundaries, even when faced with financial struggles. "You're right," he affirmatively said to Ellen, adjusting his posture, feeling the weight of responsibility morph into something uplifting. "Sustainability can also mean investing in people, our community." Her enthusiasm was infectious, pushing Jack to reclaim the excitement that had sparked his original vision. Still, nagging doubts lingered. He had exposed a vulnerability that risked his grip on authority. Would the team understand the weight of their shared choices? Despite the camaraderie created in that room, Jack accepted that leadership was a heavy mantle. Doubt flickered in his mind with every sleepless night, anxiety fueling recurring thoughts. What if his idealism led to failure? Days morphed into a continuous cycle, the tension of choice weaving into his daily routine. A pivotal moment arrived when Mrs. Hargrove called him to discuss partnerships with major retailers. The allure of exponential growth loomed before him, colorful and inviting. Yet underlying that temptation was a sad concession to market demands, something Jack loathed more than anything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack sat alone in his workshop, surrounded by half-finished designs, reminders of his mission. He rubbed his temples, grappling with a vital question. Would he forge ahead with a belief in his vision, even if it meant risking slower growth? Or would he sacrifice those ideals for quicker results under the weight of Mrs. Hargrove's aspirations? He blinked hard and stared down at the notes strewn across his desk, each bullet point a reminder of the path he had chosen. The contrasting whispers of ambition and integrity battled in his mind, creating a cacophony that seemed impossible to resolve. Outside, the town continued on, while within him, uncertainty darkened his convictions. But as darkened shadows began to seep around him, a voice inside rose against the tempest. "Focus on what matters," he mused aloud, gathering every ounce of his determination. "For Ella, for sustainability, for the legacy I want to build." That evening, Jack finally penned a letter, his first step toward clarity. It outlined not just his intentions, but the foundation of a collaborative vision he was determined to fight for, despite the trials that lay ahead. Yet as he sealed the envelope, a gnawing realization struck him. The testimony of his ideals bore a cost, an impending reckoning he could no longer avoid. Tomorrow's meeting would challenge everything he believed, demanding integrity and clarity in the face of stark choices. Would he stand firm, or would he find himself unraveling under pressure? The morning dawned crisp and clear, the gentle light filtering into Jack's workshop and brushing its warmth against the cold steel of his tools. Unlike the previous days consumed by fear and fluctuation, this day felt different, sharper, more determined. He had finally found the heart of his vision, forged through trial and the raw engagement with his team. The letter he had penned now lay on the workbench, a tangible testament to his commitment not just to his company, but to the values that mattered most to him. As he dressed, thoughts of the meeting with Mrs. Hargrove flooded his mind. Instead of dread, he felt an exhilarating rush of purpose. He envisioned how he would outline his new strategy and counter her arguments, fortified with insights from his team and clarity about what he was building. Upon stepping into the meeting room, he was greeted with the familiar tension. Mrs. Hargrove sat poised, her expression unreadable. "What have you got for me, Jack?" she asked, a slight cover of impatience in her tone. Jack inhaled deeply, anchoring his thoughts. "Thank you for meeting with me again, Mrs. Hargrove. I've reevaluated our initial discussion and come ready with a revised proposal that reflects a sustainable vision while also aligning with market realities." Opening up the document, he could feel the weight of expectations deepening, but the resolve he felt charged him forward. "Our new focus emphasizes community partnerships and ethical practices. By engaging local artisans, we create a brand that is not just about profit, but about fostering a movement toward sustainability." Her brows furrowed as she studied his proposal, and in that moment Jack made a conscious choice. He would maintain eye contact, proving to himself he commanded this space. "I understand this strategy diverges from traditional retail outlets. However, I firmly believe it embodies a narrative our consumers will resonate with. They don't just want a vehicle, they want a story, one rooted in values, ethics, and community." Mrs. Hargrove finally looked up, her eyebrows slightly raised. "Interesting approach, but tell me, how will you manage the financial constraints this entails? This kind of endeavor requires capital, Jack." "Absolutely," he replied, his voice steady. "But what we're gaining is far more than money. We're building a loyal customer base who believes in our mission, which can lead to organic growth rather than relying on high-pressure sales tactics." The silence stretched, and he kept his gaze firm, letting her digest the new direction. "I don't want us to just tackle sales at the expense of our principles. We can adapt our business model through innovative financing and local collaborations, building bonds that reflect the community we serve." As the discussion unfolded, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Jack sensed that for the first time, his words were igniting something within Mrs. Hargrove. Her barriers, initially steeped in skepticism, began to crack. "You make some strong points, Jack. It could work," she admitted cautiously. Jack pressed on, invigorated. "Furthermore, I propose we apply for grants and seek local investors who share these values. This strategy aligns with emerging eco-conscious consumer trends and positions our brand as a leader, not just another option." He saw Mrs. Hargrove hesitate before nodding slowly. "That could be a solid angle. Yet remember, being an ethical business in times of economic pressure is no easy feat. You'll need to constantly evaluate your strategy. Concessions may be necessary. Jack's heart raced, but he forced calmness. I'm prepared for that, but I won't sacrifice our core values to maintain short-term profitability. I see our venture as a legacy for Ella and the communities we touch, not just as a business. I want to create something sustainable and meaningful that my daughter can be proud of. The intensity in the room shifted, and Mrs. Hargrove's expression softened. I admire your commitment, Jack. You've shown resilience, and I see potential in what you're proposing. Let's work together while making sure we adhere to values during this transition. With that, Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him, accompanied by a hard-fought, deserved pride. He had successfully navigated the complex dance of conviction and market realities. In that moment, he wasn't just a father fighting for his son's future. He had become a business leader, grounded in purpose and integrity. The conversation concluded with a plan in place, a newfound respect forming between them. As he stepped out of the meeting room into the bright daylight, Jack felt something inside him shift. He had faced his fears, fought for what mattered, and emerged with a solid foundation to build not just a business, but a life that aligned with his core values. Determined and resolute, he returned to his shop, his family's legacy whispered through every corner. With a clear vision forged in the furnace of resilience, he was ready to transform not just his business, but accompany the very spirit of hope and sustainability into the world. It was not just a victory. This was a beginning. Now, the moment has come for you to join this journey. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now, showing your support for stories of overcoming adversity as they continue to empower and inspire. Don't wait even one more second to share this with those who need a spark of positivity.